Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to get a little bit crazy. We're going to get a little crazy. That's right. Today we're going to be doing sort of an addendum, an update, you could say, on the Building a Better Legacy series about Skullclamp. This time we're going to be focusing specifically on one deck, and of course that deck would be Affinity. That's right. Everyone probably should have been expecting that. Affinity's gotten quite a few bangers, all-time bangers recently, and I'm like, man, I bet Affinity would be nutty with my good friend Skullclamp in it. So really great stuff here, really great stuff. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot of really great stuff. I'll go ahead and put the link to the original video, the Building Beggar Lazy Skullclamp Part 1. I guess it's Part 1 now. I didn't expect to do a second part, but the deck or prospective deck, of course, that we would be playing has changed quite a bit, quite a bit. So let's get to it. So we're putting Affinity, we're putting Skullclamp together again, of course, match made in heaven or heck, depending on what side of the table you're on. Yeah, what changed was that, well, mostly Modern Horizons 2. I guess there's some other interesting cards in the mix. Um, so that's cool. That's cool. So yeah, uh, one of the things that's really quite nice is that there've just been, especially with like the colored artifact things, there's just so many additional random artifacts that do stuff, do things like portable hole, right? Typically, this be like, I don't know, an enchantment or something. But as an artifact, of course, this has tons of synergy with our deck, does really interesting stuff. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, lots of upgrades, lots of good stuff going on. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. I hope you are too. All right. What do we have here? We got pretty normal or a list that you would expect to see, right? We don't have anything weird. We have all of our enablers like in Ornithopter and Memnite and such, and Arcbound Ravager, Frogmite, Thought Modder. I mean, all these guys. Typical Affinity stuff like Mox Opal, Springleaf Drum, all this good stuff. The split on Mere Enforcer and Sojourner's Companion we can talk about real quick. It's probably better to just play a split of them because I mean, the cycling, like I get a cycling land. I mean, it's just that's not really going to come up. I mean, really, it's basically useless. Um, you already have like tons of mana, 24 mana sources. So yeah, that's not something I really want to do. But dodging like Cabal Therapy and/or Meddling Mage and named effects like that is very useful. Or well, it does have some applicability, right? Because those are cards that are played occasionally, um, but not a whole lot. But yeah, so a split between Enforcer and Companion is good there to sort of mitigate those issues a little bit. That could come up, I imagine, far more often than like trading my 0 mana 4/4 for like a land or something because I just drew like garbage or whatever. Like that's not something I really care about too much. And of course, we got white cards. In the sideboard, of course, we have Meddling Mage that we are playing against all sorts of nasty things, and all sorts of good stuff, of course. So yeah, nothing here looks probably too weird if you've been playing Affinity or been paying attention recently to the decks in Modern and/or Legacy. This'll look pretty normal to you. So let's talk a little bit in depth about some of these cards. Of course, everything you said about Skullclamp is completely true last time, right? Still true. But more than that, of course, because of its synergy with Urza Saga, of course, making not only Saga making two big boys to equip your clamp to, it tinkers the clamp into play, so it can't even be countered. And in addition, this solves the issue I had previously where like I was like, oh man, like if I'm gonna play Skullclamp, I need to kind of build my deck around it, but there wasn't always enough payoffs or whatever. Sometimes you just have like a Frogmite and like two Ornithopters, and like your deck would just kind of not do anything. Um, but what happens with Urza Saga is that we only need to play a pair of Skullclamp to tutor into play. And because, again, like Saga making huge bodies, we can put the clamps on them, and obviously they're going to have to deal with those cards. Uh, and if they do, like say, I mean, obviously if it plows it, nothing happens, right? You don't get to draw the cards because it has to die. But of course, if you have like a Ravager in play, you can sack the card in response to get a counter at least and draw cards. So that's really good too. So that's another good part about Ravager. Of course, Ravager is good against things like Meltdown and Null Rod as well. But yeah, Saga really ramps up the how good Skullclamp is. You always get it when you need it, and it's uncounterable. And you can, if you don't need it, you can get stuff like Shadow Spear, which is again another. This card is, I mean, putting Shadow Spear on your non-evasive, non-life linking tokens. I mean, yeah, that's pretty good. I probably don't need to I probably don't need to spell it out for you. Pretty good, right? So Skullclamp is really nuts with Saga. You have so many Skullclamps, and like even after like a Thoughtcast or two or whatever, being able to get a Skullclamp just keep drawing cards or whatever, keep making them have to answer your enormous threats, even just turning my good friend Thought Monitor into a 3/1 flyer is Kino. That's totally good. And speaking of Thought Monitor, this card lets us play 8 Thoughtcasts. That's why this card is so good. The 4 Thoughtcasts is like, do we really want to go this way? Do we want to just be turbo aggro or whatever? This thing is awesome. I mean, 1 mana, 2/2 flyer basically that draws 2 cards. Yes, please. I mean, you can't really get much better than that. Of course, it even adds to Affinity itself. Um, so yeah, this thing is just awesome. It's great with the Skullclamp. It's great with equipment in general. Yeah, yeah. As well as Nettle Cyst. This card is basically better than Cranial Plating for the most part because it's better against stuff like Null Rod. And of course, you can just play it as a huge, huge, huge blocker. And because you have Infinity Artifacts in play, it's like a huge/huge, so it can dodge things like Unholy Heat, which is certainly relevant. Obviously, it dodges Bolt on basically any board state, as well as any other damage-based removal, although I think it's mostly just Bolt and Heat are the really highly played ones. But yeah, this thing is great. Obviously, having a big butt too helps in combat, right, against things like Murktide Regent, which this thing just chomps on. Chomps, not chumps. It's chomping on it. Actually, I don't know. Maybe it's nettling it. It's sticking it with its little nettles. I'm not sure how that works, but Nettle Cyst is great against the damage-based removal. It's great against like all the fatties. It's great against like if they have a board full of creatures. I mean, they'll have to, it starts abyssing them. Yeah, this thing is really sweet. And of course, a very cheap equip cost if the creature ever dies for some reason, like they plow it or whatever. 2 mana to equip, not too bad. Yeah, for those reasons, I like it more than Cranial Plating, because there's just so much damage-based removal. Plating isn't bad, of course; it's still a very good card, but these are really the ones that like really push this deck into another level. Really makes it really powerful. So yeah, and of course, Thought Monitor having flying is good to put your Nettle Cyst on if like the creature dies or whatever, or if you just need to get over a board stall. Pretty powerful, pretty powerful. Oh, also, want to mention Portable Hole. That one isn't required. It's just kind of nice to supplement removal in the sideboard with Portable Hole. You could just replace it with like another, Mirror Enforcer guy, and or like another Sojourner's Companion. You could play another Cranial Plating in there. They're all pretty fine. So yeah, Portable Hole isn't required, but it is kind of an interesting card that I wanted to test out. All right, the sideboard. Let's talk about why we're splashing white for this deck. Again, basically we want to deal with combo decks and all sorts of hate cards and things like that. All sorts of other cards or other decks or archetypes we want to deal with. So Deafening Silence good against storm decks, stuff like Doomsday or whatever. So that's pretty sweet. As well as Meddling Mage, again, is great against like the show and tell stuff. It's good against naming particular hate cards, or maybe if there's a matchup where there's like one key card you don't want to deal with. Meddling Mage is great. You know, obviously this has been a pretty good card in Infinity ever since Pierre Canali really played a main deck, and it was Pro Tour Columbus, I believe, where he was able to really go nuts with it, you know, because like just meddling mage on like meltdown and stuff like that, and energy flux and things like that. Very powerful and very good. So here it's to dodge hate cards or also against combo decks, things like that. So yeah, there's a meddling mage is just sweet, and of course it beats down obviously the other good part, and of course Winter Orb. This card is awesome against well, all the control decks, all the Bant style decks, anything that's super mana hungry, you'll just slam Warb against them. And, you know, I mean, the biggest question with Winter Orb is do you go with the old one with the bear yelling at the ice ball, or do you go with like the Eternal Master one where you just have the ice ball and all these ice crystals and the card face matches the rest of your deck? Hard to say, but stunting on people with your beta Warbs, I mean, that's pretty base. That's pretty base. So that's an important question you have to ask yourself. Or if you really want to rub it in, just like play like a fifth edition one, fifth edition white bordered Winter Orb. That might be pretty humiliating, but good stuff. Good stuff there. So yeah, the sideboard cards are typically to help against the decks that the main deck isn't super well set up to beat. Stuff like um, well, obviously like the control decks and combo decks and stuff. And of course we have a split of all the different graveyard hate. That of course is for, well, Saga, right? If it wasn't obvious enough. So yeah. Okay, now there's all sorts of different options, main deck and sideboard. Esper Sentinel is just whatever. I'm not a huge fan of it because like the card drawing is nice, but I think we have enough in the deck as is. And a 1 mana 1/1, yeah, that sometimes taxes them, sometimes not. Sometimes you draw a card. I mean, it just feels like one of those Punisher cards where you're never going to get the better end of that bargain. And we already have a solid amount of air in the deck, so to speak. I'm not a huge fan of Esper Sentinel. Emery is very good, obviously, being able to recur, well, all sorts of stuff, like Ravager, even destroyed Mirror Enforcers, uh, clamps that were killed. I mean, just anything, right? Pretty sweet. Of course, Emery is also very good with Welding Jar, and that card is awesome. That is a sweet card to get off of Urza Saga. I could even see playing it in the main deck. This thing is sweet. It is really sweet. And of course we have Seal of Cleansing. Seal of Cleansing, this card is great against, well, specifically Null Rod. Obviously there's other places where it's good, but being able to preempt a Null Rod with your Seal of Cleansing is really great. So that is another option too. Sort of depends on what you're trying to beat, what you expect. So yeah, a lot of good stuff there. And of course, like these, all the removal in the sideboard helps complement the portable holes, like I said, in the main deck, of course. All right. So really, all we need to do is just figure out the best way to fight the really powerful hate cards. Again, like I mentioned, Null Rod and Meltdown are very, I don't want to say they're ubiquitous, but they're often found like in the blue-red Delver sideboards, which is, you know, kind of a pain. Stuff like Pulverize is sometimes seen in decks like the Epic Storm and other decks like that that play Burning Wish. Ruby Storm also plays Pulverize, I believe. Then you'll see random things like Hurkyl's Recall and all sorts of other kind of hate cards. Um, yeah, it's important to remember, you know, like for example against Delver, bringing in Hydroblast, very good against Meltdown as well as just random abrades. So that's really important. Um, Ravager is actually pretty good against a lot of these cards. Like you can just sack random crap. Like if they null rod you, you can sack your random dudes and extra lands or something to Ravager to make it a big boy, and then you have your Ravager and your Mirror Enforcers and stuff, or and or your tokens, things like that. to beat down, and that's probably the best way to beat Null Rod is just to kill your opponent. Meltdown is dodged pretty well by having like an actually high curve, like the Mirror Enforcers and Thought Monitors and Frogmites and even the Nettle Cysts are a little bit expensive, and that can be hard for the Delver player to melt down you in time before you kill him. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. And this deck is really good at grinding with like 4 Thoughtcast, 4 Thought Monitors, as well as the 2 Skullclamp right off the Saga. I mean, Saga is so unbelievably good here. Yeah, I mean, what more do you need to say, right? It puts your Skullclamp into play, equip it to your token, and go nuts. So yeah, you're really good at grinding, so that's really sweet. Lots of stuff going on, lots of card drawn, so that's pretty awesome. Yeah, so basically, like I said, want to deal with the combo decks. That's pretty much what we're doing here. So, but yeah, this is, I think if Skullclamp was unbanned, this is pretty close to like the sort of optimal deck list, I believe, that the Affinity deck would look like. And I think it'd be sweet. I think it'd be great. And like I said, stuff like Portal Hole isn't exactly required. I mean, you could even play stuff like Galvanic Blast. I mean, there's tons of different options to, you know, if you didn't really want to play white or didn't have to play white. But I feel like stuff like Doomsday and things like that are common, at least common enough online, that you really want to play cards to deal with them. So, yeah. But that's basically it. That's basically it, guys. Yeah, this deck has left me quite cheesed, you know, quite happy. It's a sweet deck, and I think, and people now are probably going to be more reticent. They're like, oh man, the Affinity decks are already so good. Like, ah man, like now they have Skullclamp would be way too good or something. I mean, again, all the things I said in the previous video, I think still apply. It's just that the Affinity deck is actually better now. But I don't think like having Affinity be tier 1 is a bad thing, especially because the hate is so powerful and so brutal to deal with, that like the deck kind of has to have this like really high base power level, so to speak, because otherwise there's just no way to play it. Like look at the hate cards. For example, Goblins, right? If someone plays a Plague Engineer on you, there are boards where that just does nothing, right? You have like some 2 toughness creatures, then you like tar fire it, or pyrokinesis it, or munitions expert it, or gem palm it, and like they get like a 1-for-1 at best. So, but with like Affinity, like if they play their hate cards, you probably just lose on the spot, depending on your board and everything else. So, I feel like having this Affinity deck be really strong is perfectly fine, and it's great because it's another more budget-minded deck for the format, which is really good. Outside of like the sagas are like what, 20 something odd, 25 bucks a piece. That's not too bad. I mean, when we're talking about legacy level, and then the tombs are like, what was it, like 50, 60 bucks? Again, expensive, but these cards see tons of play in all sorts of other places, so it's not like it's really expensive, like super niche cards or whatever. So yeah, I think it'd be sweet. I think it'd be sweet to have Affinity back, like really strong, stronger than it is at the moment, as well as just having Skullclamp as a tool for all these other kind of random decks. So that would be pretty neat. I didn't really go over those decks, of course, this time because pretty much everything I said last time still applies more or less, except Clamp in the current Delver decks is basically not good. It wouldn't be very playable, because, well, they don't play Young Pyromancer typically. So, but everything else is still the same, except I think the Affinity decks are better now. It would be maybe something like tier 1, maybe not, but it would be better and it would be sweet. And who doesn't like casting Arcbound Ravager and sacking their board? That's good stuff. But that's it for today, guys. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for listening to me talk, and I hope you enjoyed this, and have a nice day.